Phi Nguyen and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam.
This is a fantastic market because of the strength of the population.
A very high level of attractiveness. It makes sense for them to look at Vietnam.
Stabilised, there is an opportunity in Vietnam because it is an emerging market.
You know, there's still a huge amount of foreign investment coming in here, still a huge amount of interest in Vietnam.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. My name is Phi Nguyen and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam. During the long period of high growth, Vietnam's workforce expanded very quickly. However, a wide gap remains between the demand for and supply of skilled labor. This has certainly posed some challenges for existing companies and will remain one of the key areas of concern for potential investors in Vietnam. With that in mind, we would like to identify, analyze the challenges, and recommend relevant solutions in HR strategy and management in Vietnam on today's show, with our guest speaker, Ms. Yvonne Cox, Managing Director, Southeast Asia of Towers Watson. Thank you very much, Yvonne, for participating in the show today.
It's a pleasure.
Talking about HR strategy and planning in Vietnam, I recall coming back to Vietnam in 2004 and 2005, and constantly reminded by the people here that Vietnam is an employee market since 2005 up to now. What's your point of view on that?
I think that's correct. Particularly, it's not a question that there are not a lot of workers available in Vietnam, but the demand for certain kinds of talent means that those individuals are in high demand.
And that's probably why there should be some challenges for HR strategy and planning in Vietnam?
Absolutely.
And what would be the challenges that you identify for Vietnam?
Some of the key challenges are that, in fact, there is a shortage of the kind of qualified individuals in certain fields that companies are looking for. And so some of the areas, for example, that we see there is a lot of demand and relatively limited supply would be in the ranks of middle management and certain technical specialties as well. So that means that there's a lot of competition for those resources, and employees have a lot of choice about where they can go.
Vietnam had what we call an open door policy in 1986, and in the 90s we start seeing a lot of an influx of foreign investors in Vietnam, and they start recruiting a lot of English sort of speakers, local English speakers, and then train them on the job.
Right.
So up to now we've got such a pool of people who have no formal education, but basically very much work experience in MNCs. Is this pool getting any larger with the return of overseas students to Vietnam?
I think that there's the addition of the overseas students is probably helpful. What I think there might be an irony in that situation, in that many multinational employers would like the combination of experience and qualifications and education relevant to what they're looking for.
So we're not going to see this pool getting any larger in the very near future.
One of the good things about demographics is, as the years go by, those individuals do get more experienced. So presumably that will improve the pool of supply. But on the other hand, I think we can logically expect that there will continue to be a certain war for talent, to use an expression that's been
war
around
for talent. I like that.
Yes.
So with that in mind, is staff turnover very high in Vietnam?
Well, in fact, we have some data on that, and our data shows that the staff turnover on average is somewhere between 17 to 18%, which is relatively high, and it certainly varies by level in the organization as well, with the highest level of turnover probably where you would expect, which is really in the middle management and the critical technical skills area.
And how's that in comparison to other Asian countries? Is it a lot higher, or is it?
In Asia in general, the turnover levels are quite high. So Vietnam would be right in the middle of the pack as far as that goes. I think what's interesting in Vietnam is the focus on the middle management and the technical skills.
Since employees have a lot of choices in Vietnam, let's talk about the drivers of attraction
Yes.
and retention for the employees. So what is it that would make a local Vietnamese employee select a company to work for?
We see a lot of focus in terms of our data in things that we call strategy and direction and image. So that's very, very important. Also,
Strategy and direction.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? What is it that they look for in strategy and direction?
there's probably two components. First, that there's a strategy and direction that they can identify with. It looks as though the company is going to be a winner, so to speak. And secondly, leadership that is aligned and that is, in fact, inspiring in terms of the strategy and direction.
So the local Vietnamese are very much looking towards the future. They want to
That's
know where
correct.
they're going with the company.
They want to work for a winner, I think, is really, because we do see this in Vietnam and in other countries. That's why the second area that I mentioned, the so-called image, the fact that the company would be highly regarded is important.
I am particularly interested in this image factor because image is very much the face value, the oriental face value of Asia, and for Vietnam, which is an emerging market at the moment, image is everything in branding as well. So
Right.
is this like a branding technique of companies towards their employees?
I think that's a very, very good point. More and more companies are recognizing that they have to portray an employer brand as well. So something that is compelling and exciting for employees so that they feel proud to work for that company.
But what makes up the image part of a company so that an employee can be proud of?
Part of it has to do with its products, its customer service, and quality. And quality actually came out as very important in some of our studies around Vietnam. In addition, they want to work for a company that is going to offer them opportunity. And that comes back to what we call the employee value proposition. What's in it for the employee? If I work for your company, what's in it for me?
Those are the
attract
top two key factors. Any other factors that would affect their decision?
But employees are looking for managers and leaders that seem to care about them, that give them a certain amount of autonomy and authority to do their jobs well. And that is particularly true with the younger generation of employees.
So would you say that coaching is very, very important?
Extremely important. The ability to coach, the ability to inspire, the ability to develop people is a really important quality. Now, the ironic part, if we come back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, is that when there's a shortage of middle management and a shortage of skilled middle management, we can see where that could be challenging.
So if you have a local middle manager coaching other locals in the company, you may have a problem there as well.
There could be that. It could be that, and also just the fact that retaining the good. When you think about it, if you have a good middle manager, actually someone who's effective, who's a very good manager, chances are that individual is going to be in high demand, and so it's going to be difficult to retain that kind of an individual. So that's what I meant by it could be very challenging.
What about their performance? Are they very interested and would like to see their performance is being evaluated?
They want to get feedback on their performance because this comes back to a fundamental of learning and development.
Is there a cultural aspect that would hinder that in Vietnam? Because Vietnamese are very much not very straightforward people, and we're not very open to talk about our performances or what we are good at and what we're not good at. Is that something that you would like to talk about?
I think that's certainly an element. There's also something that we see across Southeast Asia, in actual fact, which has to do with it's not always culturally appropriate to distinguish one good performer from the others, to make one person stand out from others. So that idea of differentiating performance can be a bit of a challenge, and it can be a little bit countercultural.
Touching base on that cultural aspect, is empowerment something that employees in Vietnam would look for?
Very much so. But what we see in general in the world, that is particularly important to Generation Y. So if we take into consideration that Vietnam obviously has a somewhat young, on average, young workforce, we're going to have even higher proportion of those Gen Y, so one would not be surprised to see that there's an expectation of that. I think
but
the other
is
thing...
the skill level there yet for them to basically be empowered and make their own decisions in an organization?
It's a very good point, and there's obviously a need for balance there. Another aspect that probably contributes to the interest in empowerment in Vietnam is a certain feature that we see that's, I won't say unique to Vietnam, but very, very obvious in Vietnam, which is it seems as though the dream of most individuals or employees is to be an entrepreneur, to run their own business. So to the extent that employees are interested in that, and that's really in the back of their mind as the ideal career is to really have my own business, the more that employers can make people feel like they own their part of the business, and also that they feel as owners in the business, the more positive the level of engagement is going to be.
That's a great point on entrepreneurship, because Vietnamese are very, very much entrepreneurial.
Exactly.
Yeah. So given all these factors that you've just mentioned, how do you see companies being able to leverage on these understandings to be able to come up with a strategy and planning in terms of HR for Vietnam?
I think there's two things. One, our surveys and studies certainly show that there's a need to focus on some of these positive elements. We also note that there's some areas where our research shows employees in Vietnam are somewhat less satisfied and happy about certain things than their colleagues in other parts of Asia.
Is that anything to do with salary and benefits?
Probably the top one. Well, there's actually a couple. One is around the whole idea of stress and work-life balance, and the second one around salary, compensation, benefits.
Stress and work-life balance.
Yeah.
Like Vietnam has been through war for the last 30 years, so what sort of stress are they talking about?
I think that also could link with the idea that there is a high demand for certain types of individuals. There's somewhat of a shortage. It's quite likely that a number of employees are carrying extra workload. So that could be what.
So how do you actually solve this issue of negativity in terms of work-life balance and stress?
One of the things that we've seen applied, and it's not possible in all roles, is to provide, it comes back to providing a little more empowerment, a little more flexibility.
Have you actually seen any companies in Vietnam actually doing that?
We do see the professional services firms being quite open to the fact that individuals have clients to satisfy, but how they do that and where they do that is less important than actually getting those kinds of results.